Drawing and sketching is a lot easier than we often make it out to be. Our brains want us to immediately draw something absolutely perfect, and we don't understand that actually to get to perfect or photorealistic, or to get to a loose and interesting style, it all starts in the same place, and that is with understanding the simple basics. So this first lesson, we're going to look at those simple basics. We're going to look at how shapes, and we're talking about simple things, triangles, squares, circles, how these simple ideas, which we all know about, can build up to create actually quite interesting objects. We can draw people by joining together a circle and a couple of triangles. We can even change what shapes we're using those. So instead of a circle and a couple of triangles, we could have a kind of circle and a rectangle and two little triangles at the bottom. And these same shapes can become other things. So let's find ourselves a little circle here, a triangle. And what have we got? We've got a little pear. Perhaps behind that, another circle, and that's an apple. And so all of these simple things, from still life through to people, through to urban scenes and way more, it's all really just based on this concept of simple shapes. Seeing those shapes and allowing yourself to actually simplify, to actually just draw things simply, that is the starting block that you will need to literally draw anything. So before we get into our sort of different lessons where we're going to draw pages, for example, like this, full of people, pages full of household objects and flowers, we're just going to sort of wander around a page and doodle a few random things, a few little ideas, and talk about how we can find shapes, and also a couple of extra little bits and pieces that we might want to think about to make these shapes a bit more interesting. So the first thing we're going to do, let's just doodle some things around the house. So what about a simple mug? And what have we got here? Well, basically it's a rectangle, isn't it? And you'll notice I'm not trying very hard to keep my line straight. In fact, having a little wobble in that line is more interesting than if I draw this bland rectangle. You know, I've got a mug here, and here I've got a bland rectangle and a sort of bland semicircle. Now, I'm not saying this is wrong, but I'm saying for me this is more interesting. So one thing we might want to think about alongside our concept of shapes is a concept of the weight or the character of lines. I'm just going to write weight and character here. And we can advance this a little bit further. What if we draw a quick little house and we just make things wobble and jump around? And you know, I'm exaggerating this style. It's very much what I love doing, is making silly wobbly lines when I'm doing my my drawings and my art, my paintings of all kinds, but it's more fun, and instantly this house has got a little bit more character just for having that interesting line. We can pop a garage in the front here, and look, all quick, simple, wobbly lines, and it's really already brought this house together. But we can advance our sort of lines, the character, the weight a little bit more as well. For example, to start suggesting things like shadows. So in our house, where might the shadows be? Well, underneath the eaves. So we do now a bit of a bolder line here. Not a bolder line everywhere, like here, but a bolder line to specifically show a point of shadow. Maybe under the windows is shadowed too. Maybe this is our door, and it's got a little heavy door frame which feels shadowed. So now we're picking apart specific bits, and we're again changing the weight and the character of our line to fit with that. Character of line can tell us so much more though. If I draw one of our shapes, if I draw our circle and I just make it nice and simple, relatively neat, not a perfect circle, but you know, relatively neat. We've got a relatively symmetrical circle there. we can see a circle, but we can't see anything else much more exciting. If I keep that circle sort of neat, but I give it a bit of boldness at one edge, so I come back and make this bolder here, maybe even bolder, just through going over the line a few times or pressing a little harder, we get the idea of a shadow. And then we could even add other circles with shadows here and maybe a little shadow there, and maybe one more. And here, perhaps we have a bowling ball and extra bits of line work. This is another useful concept. The idea of hatching simple, sort of repetitive light lines. These different lines could suggest perhaps even more shadow. And our smooth circles taken on a sort of different idea here. Now if we come back again and we make our circle more sort of ragged, so we've still got basically the same shape, but now it's got a kind of different texture. And then we find a couple of those specific details. Maybe there's a little sort of line going around here, and that line's got that same sort of texture. Give a few more of these little lines here, so these little textural type lines, and then we can build up those little textural lines. Well, perhaps now what we've got a bowling ball here, got a tennis ball here. You know, simple ideas, simple little touches, and simple variation of our weight of line. If we just advance that idea even more, we could do an almost cloud-like circle here, and then we could do a sort of slightly smoother circle here. And if we pop little horns, some little downward poking lines as well, 2 eyes and a nose, well look, we've basically got ourselves a sheep, a really simple, very easy sheep. A little bit of hatching or a little bit of textural marks to show that woolly edge, maybe even giving some funky little feet. And you see how this same shape with a bit more variation can build up into all sorts of different things. Now, I said there's a couple of things that we can think about with our simple shapes and how we vary the weight and things like that. And if we just come back, for example, to our people, that'll be a nice way we can demonstrate this a little bit more. So here we've got a very simple person, simple shapes. We can do a couple more, maybe have a couple of people next to each other. And again, all these people look really simple shapes, building them up, and the simplicity lets the viewer kind of come up with their own idea about what's going on. So here we can have 2 people stood right next to each other, and maybe they're both wearing ties. So it's not certain, is it? There's definitely a lot left to the imagination here, but maybe they're both wearing ties. Now, to get the relationship of these 2 people, to make it clear they're overlapping, again, we can make one of those lines nice and bold. And then to show the shadow that makes these 2 objects interact, these 2 people interact, we can do more of this simple hatching. So now we're using this weight and character of line to show the interactions between objects. Another nice way of doing that is if we get our fruit bowl here. Nice simple circle again, isn't it? It's just a half circle, really smooth this time. And we have some fruit, different simple shapes. We can just overlap them all. But now we come back and we make, say, this shape a little bolder. It's suddenly in front. So that bold line, even though we've drawn over the top, is in front. If we make this just a little clearer, our pear is sort of in the middle, and we do a really faint line in the background, maybe even a little faint line here. That's in the very distance. And a few little textures. This could become an orange. This can become a sort of apple in the midground. And this banana we can really make nice and bold, have the extra line coming down, and it's in the foreground. So now we've got our weight and character, which is telling us about the material, it's telling us about the sort of position, it's telling us about the texture. And we've also mentioned a few times this idea of hatching these sort of extra little lines. And these are giving us even more detail about shadow and shape. So, as our last little bit of doodling, we can draw really simple objects. We can draw boxes even, just a simple box, and find that by applying this kind of layer of hatching, we suddenly make it 3D. And we apply hatching down here, and we suddenly make it 3D and interacting with the ground. We put a little horizon line in the background and we can really understand what's going on. So the same is going to work in our objects here. We can make this banana 3D. We can make this house have a little bit more 3D-ness as well. We can make these windows darker and take on some extra texture. This bowling ball, we've already got a little bit of a shadow, but if we build it up through overlapping hatching, we can get a real sense that this is a 3D object. Same with this tennis ball. And notice here how my hatching isn't this kind of linear hatching, so we can do simple linear hatching, straight lines. We can cross hatch, where we go one direction then another. But we can also do more naturalistic hatching, where we make all these little scratchy marks which fit the texture. Here this might be the texture of a tennis ball, or we might draw a tree, and our tree is just a simple shape, but inside it's got sort of these leaf-like textures. And if we build up our hatching in these leaf-like textures, instead of in lines like this, these little leaf-like textures will make it feel far more real than it might otherwise be. So by now, hopefully, you can draw along, take a few more minutes to just fill your page with little ideas, practicing simple things, simple objects around the house, which we're going to be doing in a moment as well. And just thinking how, with my available tools, my available paper and pen, how can I come up with varied lines? And what do those varied lines do for my art? From providing the material, the texture, the shape, the 3D-ness, the, a little bit of character, a little bit of fun. And just think about what processes, as you're doing this, make you feel good. What processes of drawing, of changing weight of line, of how you make marks and things like that, what is actually enjoyable to you? Because that fundamentally is what we're after. We're after working out ways of drawing which work both for the viewer, but more importantly for you to enjoy yourself filling up pages like this.